You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 48. Subscribe to us and leave us a review in iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
Or visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and more.
Send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net. Follow us on Twitter at codingblocks or head to www.codingblocks.net and find all our social links there at the top of the page. With that, I'm Alan Underwood.
Joe Zach is back.
Yes, sir.
And I'm Michael Outlaw.
Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. Good to be back. Excellent episode, by the way. Really enjoyed it.
Appreciate that. It was, we missed you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so sappy stuff out of the way. Let's get into some podcast news.
Awkward moment aside. Let's get into more awkward moments where Outlaw tries to read names.
Bro hugs all around. All right. So you want to do the iTunes or the Stitcher ones?
Oh, no, I was really joking. I think that because Joe was out, he should have to read a bunch, if not all. Although I will say, though, that I think it was Russell Hammett commented that maybe people are just making the names more difficult on purpose so that, you know, it's more difficult for me.
Hey, before we get into reading these, I think the first one should have like a soundtrack to it, like, take this broken dev.
Oh, my God. Really? That just happened.
It did. All right.
Hey,
so
are we recording?
We are. So go ahead, Joe. You could read these off this time.
All right. So
I guess now you got to sing it because he's like really up the game there. I'm really going to have a hard time next time.
I don't know if you guys would like my singing.
What was that?
That's my metal voice. That's the only way I can sing.
All right. What you got? Let's do this thing.
Broken Dev, Simon the U, Hruncito, Terrence D, Rich 11145, Hardcore Rockstar, BCMSCO, Friend of Entropy, Fred Steban, Ibanki 7, Islander 201111, I Am Quaz, Adam Hannigan, and for Stitcher we've got Snapper 109, Brian Place, Veso 7, Zelig 880, Cube 00, Joro 550, Philip Lowney, and Rocket Raccoon.
That was nicely done, sir.
I feel like
There's some tough ones in there.
Like
I made it sound easy, though.
He did have some time to practice these, though.
While I was singing.
Yeah. So what else we got going on? I think somebody might have gotten in front of a camera while they were missing from the microphone.
Yes.
Yeah, I did. Yep. So I made a couple videos doing some Code War problems. Just kind of wanted to give a shot. The idea is basically to do the problems in such a way that's similar to the kind of stuff that might happen in an interview, the things you might talk about. So I tried to talk through solving the problem, and I've gotten some pretty good feedback so far. So you guys check it out and let me know what you think. And we'll have links to that in the show notes at /episode 48.
Yep, and also a heads up, too, we don't have it in the show notes, but it will be there here in a second. You can also go to youtube.com/codingblocks and see any videos that we've uploaded. So that's an easy way to see all of the current and future videos that will be there. So definitely check it out and leave Joe a thumbs up on that video. It's pretty excellent.
And speaking of Joe getting his interview skills ready, Peter Nelson in our Slack channel posted a great link that I'm kind of phrasing like how to become an engineer at Google, right? And he had posted a link to a Reddit article that was just a link to this GitHub page that had the Google Interview University and like basically everything you needed to know if you wanted to get in at Google. And the idea was that where is that post? There was this guy that wants to get a job at Google, and so these were his notes of what he needed to do to get the job. But then I also found which it's an incredibly impressive list of things to study. But Google also has a student's guide to technical development, and that has a lot of the same information on it. I thought, oh, this is all of this is great information. So we're going to include some links in the show notes to both of those. But I mean, it's things like knowing the different data structures, knowing trees, sorting, recursion, processes and threads, right? Just a lot of things that you may have heard people talk about in class or in the work environment. Maybe we've mentioned it. Just a great resource of information, though. Like, even if you're not trying to get a job at Google, this was stuff that would be good to know.
Yeah, and just a heads up, if Google's looking for these type things, so are the Amazons and Microsofts and the big tech companies of the world. So this is something that would help you out in any type of interview that is super technical.
In the Google link that we'll have up there has on their page, they have things like, hey, you want to learn cryptography? Here's some online resources for learning cryptography. You want to learn web development? You want to learn Android development? Like, depending on what you want to do, they're sending you to a link to something else that can teach you that, right? You want to learn about machine learning? Here you go. Here's a link from Stanford University on machine learning.
Excellent. Very nice.
And should mention it is a multi-month study plan.
Oh, yeah.
So there's some serious content here.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, when I read the GitHub post, it was, no, I guess it just says multi-month. I thought it was a year-long process, but maybe I read that somewhere else, or maybe I just made that up in my mind. But and it looks like there's a translation that might be Mandarin or some other character-based language
that we can't read.
But so the Google interview university link is apparently offered in another language as well.
Very
and this
nice.
is all self-taught, so no CS degree, right? This is this guy's study plan to become an engineer at Google.
That's awesome. So a heads up, I think on the last episode, Outlaw's tip was, get out there and find out which meetups are coming up. So a couple of ones that we want to bring up here are Atlanta Code Camp is this coming weekend, which this will be helped by them probably. Or actually this episode won't be. So I hate it. We'll probably tweet this out and maybe put it on our social things. But you can still register for it. It's this Saturday, October 15th. So hopefully you'll be there. And if so, maybe we'll run into you. So that's a big one coming up.
And if someone did run into you, would you have anything you could give them? High five, maybe?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we could probably give him a high five.
Do we have
Yeah.
anything else?
Oh, are you referring to
missed this.
my plethora? Are you talking to me? You want to say hello to my little friend? Do you want one of my stickers?
Saw a picture on Twitter there of some hot stacks.
Yeah, man. So coding block stickers are now a thing.
Yes.
And they turned out amazing. They're not gigantic. So I think it was like a 2-inch by 2 3/4 inch, roughly, is the dimensions of it. So, perfect for your laptop. And I'm pretty sure that it'll make the performance of it that much better.
Definitely.
So, yeah. We can include a link to the tweet, some of the tweets about that, but definitely there's links to Sticker Mule. And, hey, if we happen to see you in person, we're going to be giving them out.
Yeah, we'll hand them out. And I'm going to, I just took a picture of the back of Outlaw's laptop, and I'll put the picture on this post so that you can kind of see him reference. If you know how big that Apple is on a MacBook Pro, you'll see about what size it is. It's not obnoxious. Maybe it should be. But, it's a good looking, in our opinion, it's a good looking sticker. So we're excited about it.
I mean, it's pretty much everyone's opinion. That's like, actually, I read a Wikipedia article about how good looking that sticker was. So it's actually fact, because Wikipedia is like really factual.
True that.
Yeah. So what else have we got going on?
You're going to a conference.
Yep. There's Atlanta, here in the Atlanta area, Connect.tech, previously known as Connect.js, is October 20th through the 22nd. So that's always a fun one. I'm really curious because in previous years, it was more JavaScript based. But now that they've kind of gone more general purpose with Connect.tech, to see where that's going to go. So I'm looking forward to that. And then unrelated to conferences, I wanted to bring up this story about, did you know that your web browser hates your SSD? Have you heard about this?
I have not.
Yeah. this is making the rounds here lately about it was an article that someone published based off of their findings specific to Firefox, but they're finding out that Chrome is as bad too. And the short story is this guy, there was this tool called SSD Life, and he had found that on a day that he wasn't using his computer, it was just sitting there idle, 12 gigabytes was written to his SSD in the day that he wasn't really using it.
12 gigabytes.
And it turned out to be Firefox. So, you know how Chrome and Firefox have this amazing feature where, like, if you crash the browser, you can just, on a Mac, you could, like, Command-Shift-Tab and reopen all your tabs, or Control-Shift-Tab on... Control-Shift-T on a Windows. I'm sorry, I think it's a tab on the Mac. Yep. I meant Command-Shift-T on the Mac. And it'll just reinstate all of your browser sessions, right? All your tabs back open, right? Well, it turns out that comes at an extreme cost. What's happening is, in the case of Firefox, it's writing the state of the browser out to a file called recovery.js, and it's doing it once every 15 seconds. And it turns out it's not being very efficient about it. So rather than looking for deltas and writing the deltas, it's just full dumping the state out every 15 seconds. And, that is costing your SSD over time, right? It's wearing it out prematurely.
Dude, and we all have at least 10 tabs open at any given time.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So, it turns out that's pretty bad. So I did see in the Mozilla bug tracker, there was a ticket to have it fixed. It wasn't addressed yet, but there is a setting. We'll include a link to the original story at servethehome.com. And basically the quick fix for it, though, was that you could go into, specific to Firefox, you could go to browser.sessionstore.interval, and you could change the setting there from something other than 15 seconds, whatever you feel is appropriate for your setting. I'm just going to wait until they fix it in the browser. But
man, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was interesting though, and again, Chrome has a similar issue. So the author, he did update it to say that he was investigating that he was seeing 24 gig a day of writes from Chrome. Wow. Chrome is definitely just as bad. No word on Safari or Edge. Maybe it's too early, but I'm not enough of. I honestly, I guess I just stick to Firefox and Chrome more than those two.
Right.
Pretty sure that Safari at least has the same Command-Shift-T feature, doesn't it?
Never tried it.
Yeah. So well, I mean, if it does do it though, then you would assume that it might be doing something similar.
Right.
But yeah, it hates your SSD. So
unreal. Well, I have some unfortunate news. My tip from last episode, which I was really excited about, and I mean, even Outlaw had clicked and seen it while we were doing the show notes.
Well, I mean, once you got the link right.
Right after I said it right. OAuth for ASP.net.com has been down basically since our episode was released. They're getting a DNS gateway failure or some garbage, so I'm hoping it comes back up, but just a heads up for you guys.
I think that's just the strength of our audience is like hammering on that site. The poor guy's like, oh my gosh, why is my site getting so much traffic?
Are we the new Kardashians of the internet?
Oh, I wasn't going to go there.
Did not see that one coming.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're trying to say something about my backside here. And I really don't appreciate it.
So that's unfortunate, though. I mean, seriously. And it was an excellent resource. I even tried to go to the Google cached version of it, and it wouldn't pull up either. So for the time being, that's just down. If it doesn't fix itself, then we'll pull it from the show tips. And
that's it for the news. Is it? I feel like
that hurt.
I feel like Alan might have a little bit of news he wants to share, or did you want us to announce it?
Joe, you want?
Yeah, you want me to announce it?
Yeah, you do it.
All right.
Just whisper it. Just mumble it.
It's actually really exciting. I don't know why we're dancing around it. Alan has become an official Microsoft MVP.
Yeah, man. you know what? It's actually super duper exciting.
Yeah,
I
congrats,
honestly
man.
didn't realize I was going to be that excited about it until it happened. And then I was like,
You didn't realize how bad you wanted it. You didn't want to
Right.
admit to yourself how bad you wanted it until it was done.
I think it's one of those things, right? Like if
Yep.
if you're playing a sport or something, you're not going to feel like you really want it that bad, because if you lose, you're going to feel kind of crushed. So, but yeah, man, it's pretty exciting. A lot of cool stuff that goes along with it. So super stoked about it. And yeah, man, you know, anybody that wants to give back to the community or whatever, I'm hoping that both Joe and Mike will get it here in one of the next go-arounds, because it really is kind of cool to have that. So
yeah. Well, congratulations, man.
Thank you very
we
much.
are
Yep.
very excited for you.
It's
Yeah, it almost
pretty
looks like you're afraid to say it. You're like, I don't know, they might take it away.
yeah, I mean, you can't. I can't say anything. I've got an NDA, so I can't actually talk to you guys anymore. So
Oh, crap.
you'll be doing the show by yourself.
Dang
And
it.
let's not forget the trophy.
I have a trophy. I'll have to put a picture of that up there. That's actually really exciting too. So,
All right.
yeah, man. So thank you, and super stoked.
All right. Well, there was an email that we got in between the last episode and this one that I thought was an amazing question that I really loved. And I think, Joe, you're going to like this question too. I think this is going to be one right up your alley as well. And so Brian writes in, says he's listening to the back catalog and he's currently on the episode about unit testing. And that he's a grader for an undergraduate class, and he's grading the code that the students have submitted, and that a lot of the students they've developed it, they tested it to make sure that the app worked, but he was able to quickly break their apps, right? So I mean, you can imagine it being a calculator app that maybe he's just doing very large numbers to get overflows or whatever. Who knows how he's breaking it, but the point is he's breaking it. So he asked the question, like, how balanced do you guys think the testing should be between showing that something works and trying to prove that it doesn't?
I honestly like the approach of proving it doesn't work.
Well, the first thing that I loved about this question was, like, what an amazing way to, like, just boil down the testing into, like,
Right.
you're either all of your unit tests are either fall into one category. Either you're proving that it does work, or you're trying to prove to yourself that it doesn't work,
Right.
or to other people, right? Joe, what's your take?
Yeah, I like trying to break things, but I mean, it kind of depends on the site that you're working on. Like, if you're a Google or an Amazon and you expect 200 billion clicks per second, whatever, a day, then people are going to find stuff like that. But if it's your little calculator app or something, then I run a little calculator site, and sometimes people do weird stuff and get errors, and I feel like if they do something weird every once in a while to get an error, I don't really care that much. It's just not that high on the priority as making sure that the happy path works well. So,
But in your
I guess it
unit
depends on
test?
your audience, but say what?
But in your unit test?
Oh, in the unit test. Oh, no. I don't even do that much weird stuff in the unit test. I like to make sure the coverage is good when I'm doing unit testing, and just try to make sure that, the normal stuff kind of works, but I don't go too crazy trying to do like fuzz testing or passing, extremely large negative numbers or anything. It's totally out there.
Oh.
But I think if unit testing is more of a design tool anyway, for me, my main purpose isn't correctness. It's just, design tool and for shortening my feedback cycle and making sure I don't break things.
Well, it is important to note, though, that you could have amazing coverage, from your unit tests and still have errors, right? You could still, easily have flaws, because coverage, unit test coverage does not equal thoroughness.
Oh, coverage could just mean that you hit that method one time. That's it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't have any measurement about how many different types of states you passed in. Maybe, literally, like you said, it just got executed at least one time. But I guess so. That's a different approach though than what I take, and so I was really surprised to hear you say that, Joe, because I'm normally trying to throw random things at when I'm writing my unit test. I'm trying to throw like random things and trying to come up with in my mind like, hey, what about this scenario? If I pass this in or that in, like, what happens here? Or what about the extremes? Am I handling the extremes correctly? What happens if, like, okay, nulls, for example, what happens if a null gets passed in? Is that properly being, dealt with? Which, that definition may vary depending on case. Things like that.
But maybe throwing an exception is the right answer in that case. If you try to divide by 0, you should get a divide by 0 error. You should get some sort of error that relates to that.
Well,
and so
but
maybe throwing an
test that.
exception isn't wrong.
Exception does not mean error,
Right.
Like throwing an exception is a very valid thing. So in your unit test, you could assert that a certain exception type is thrown.
Yep. I mean, for me, like when I was reading this and I thought about it just internally. So it depends on how core it is to something and how controlled it is at the time when you're writing the unit test. So like for a calculator, you probably do want to check the edge cases, right? Because it's a calculator. If it's something in your app that at the time that the unit test was created that there's controlled inputs and outputs, then maybe you just check for those certain types of controlled things. Like, I don't know that I would go crazy on something that didn't allow negative numbers, trying to test negative numbers and that kind of thing. So I don't know. That's such a tough one. I think that when you're writing your unit test, at least to me, you should try and think of the different ways that it could break and write your unit test against that. So I kind of like the approach of how can this break?
Yeah. Yeah, another thing that came to mind too, though, which isn't exactly related, but I know that, like, I've done this where, someone will report a bug, and they'll say, like, oh, if you do this scenario, then it's broken. And then I'll be like, okay, great. I'll take that scenario, I'll write up a unit test to mock that scenario, and then code until that new unit test passes.
Yep, and that's a good way to do it.
So I'm like literally adding on, to the quote library of unit tests in that scenario.
Yep, but I do think there's a point of going overboard, right? Like you can't check for every single little thing that's going to happen. So I don't know, man. Again, it kind of depends on how core it is to what you're doing. So I don't know. Great question, and obviously there's already. I mean, between the three of us, we've kind of got different opinions. So I mean, for a professor, that's even got to be a little bit more difficult, right?
Yeah, I don't know if he said he was a professor, just a grader.
He was grading.
Yeah, it wasn't clear on that point. But yeah, it was totally amazing question though. Like like I said, I really loved the fact that it was broken down into either you're trying to show something that works or something that doesn't work. Because I never really thought about unit tests in either way. Like that, I was just testing that it. It works. But then when I got this question, I started thinking about it, I guess then that's when it kind of made me, a moment of introspection there. And I thought, well, I guess I actually am trying to test that, to prove to myself that it doesn't work and that I need to fix something. And then I'm happily surprised when, oh, it actually did work. What do you know? Got it right.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the next section here of our clean code series, and similar to the last episode, we will be doing a book giveaway. Last episode we were doing 3 books, so one from each of us, and we were going to do. When are we going to do that drawing though? Were we going to give like one episode between it? So we'll do the drawing for episode 47 when we record episode 49.
Yep.
And we'll do the drawing for this episode 48 when we record 50.
Yep.
Is the plan?
And then that way that'll give everybody time to listen and comment if they get a chance. So
there'll be one book giveaway for episode 48 though. So your chances are dwindling. But if you are in, say, episode 47 and you want to enter in 48 as well, you can, but obviously if you win in 47, then it won't count in 48.
Yep.
And same rules as last time. Go to the show notes for episode 48. So www.codingblocks.net/episode 48 and leave a comment there to enter yourself into the giveaway.
Yep. And there have been some fantastic comments on 47. So, feel free to add to that one too, because there's still time to enter to win. Again, 47 is 3 books we're giving away. 48 is 1. So your chances on 47 are a little bit better. So definitely go up there and continue to leave comments, and we'll revisit this in one more episode. All right. So here we go. This is chapter 3.
No, 3.
Chapter 3 that we're diving into, which is functions. And this is an absolutely fantastic chapter. A lot of meat in here, so let's jump on in.
Yeah, so this was the, I gave it away in the last episode, but this was specifically the chapter where it time boxed the function and says, can you look at a function and understand it completely within 3 minutes? Because if you can't, if you have to study it for longer than 3 minutes, then that method that function is too complex. There's something wrong with it.
Yep.
And 3 minutes is a long time, but I kind of think that nowadays attention spans have shortened a little bit, and now it's more like 1 minute.
Yeah, actually, though, is that even fair? Because have you seen some link queries?
Yeah, right. So it's funny. They had their first and second rule of functions. The first one is a function should be small. And then the second rule was it should be smaller than that.
Right.
So, I mean, that's pretty much it. And they say that it should be barely 20 lines long.
I love that.
20 lines.
I
But
mean,
20 lines in Java is like nothing. That's like no code. That's hello world.
that's just your declarations.
Well, yeah, but they're talking about the entire method, not all the usings and everything along with it and the class.
No, this is
declaration.
specifically the function or a method, right? Not all your headers.
Oh,
at the
so
top
that's
of the
actually a
file.
great point too to call out. Like we're not talking about like there's a whole other chapter for classes.
Yes,
right?
this is not a class.
So this is specifically like the previous chapter was on like the guts inside of a function, and this one is is about the function.
The function. I mean, one of my very favorite things in this entire chapter was when you're looking at a function, it should read like a story. Like you should be able to just kind of scan down it and it say something like do this or get this or do this and then, stop that. I just love that idea that it's almost like a narrative.
Yeah, and I love this broken down too. So like let's say you hop into a public method and you're trying to find something in there and change, and you see, less than 20 lines, and it's like, do this, then do that, then do something else. And oh, I need to go to something else. So you can hop right into that function, and you've just skipped possibly hundreds of lines that you didn't have to scroll through. And I know, I'm sure you guys have been on like the phone or on a WebEx or something with somebody, and you're talking through, and they're like, yeah, scroll down about 190 lines down to 414.
Oh,
you're just
man.
scrolling. You're watching the ifs go in and out, like a waveform, and you're, you're just trying to keep track of where you are.
Well, here's like the classic though, is that the function should do one and only one thing. So if you had to describe to somebody what this function does, and you have to use the word and, chances are your function is doing more than one thing.
Yeah, in this one, and I love this one, but there were even parts where they say, this may seem sort of contradictory when you say it's only doing one thing, because what if you do have a logical statement in there, like if this, then this, right? And what they described was basically when you say it's doing one thing, you're actually only accomplishing one task. That doesn't mean there's not a decision in that task, but you're only doing that one very specific thing.
Well, yeah, and actually, I'm pretty sure this was the same section too, or maybe it was another one where it was talking about switch statements and how that felt kind of wrong. Oh, actually, it was the next section. It was in a later section within the book, but where I'll go ahead and skip ahead to it, where the switch statements felt kind of like a betrayal to the one doing one thing, right? But the one blessed place where they said use a switch statement was in the case of, say, a factory, right?
Yeah.
That was an example where it was like, okay, well, this is okay. This is an acceptable version.
But it's only doing one thing, right? It's creating instances of classes.
Returning some instance type, right?
Yep.
The switch was acceptable there. But if
Yep.
you're doing a switch inside of some other function and you're using that switch to decide, determine logic, then it's doing too much.
Yep.
And the thing with switch statements, they're like gremlins and being fed after midnight. you hardly ever see just one unless it's in a factory. The deal is you do a little switch statement somewhere, and you're like, oh, well, this word, if case A, case B is this, inevitably you end up doing another one to kind of translate it back at some point. And then next thing you know, you're doing a third one. And next thing you know, you got like 16 freaking switch statements, and you're starting to think maybe I should have encapsulated this somewhere.
Yep, and they're almost always doing the same type thing. And they even talk about that. If you're doing a switch statement, chances are you should have some sort of method on a class that will return something, right? So like instead of saying, case when, origin is American, then return first, middle, and last name. Case when, some other thing, then just return first name and last name. Instead of that, you should have different classes of those types that say get full name, and then they can do their own thing. So there's no switch statement there. You literally had an interface that had get full name as the method, and then when you call it, it does its own thing.
Well, I did remember something, a little meta here. It was that I'd forgotten that we wanted to do the code review. The live code review. Remember that conversation?
Oh, you said that there was something that bothered you in a code thing that I had done, and I don't remember what it was.
There was some code of mine that you had, I'm going to quote it, cleaned up, right?
Okay.
But I remember, and the reason why I quoted that is because after you did it and you sent me the pull request, you said, yeah, I guess, everything that we've been talking about with clean code kind of got to me, so I decided to clean some of this up. And then I was like, that's what was kind of like not a stab at me, but it kind of like, I was like, whoa, hold up, wait a minute.
Oh.
Because
See, I think you took that wrong. First off, I didn't even know it was your code.
I know you didn't. That was the beauty of it. But because like there was because like where the method that you cleaned, you quote cleaned, there was two things that I thought like, okay, that was honestly, bravo. That one part was good because one, there were some hard coded numbers in there, and you identify, made those constants basically. So I was like, okay, yeah, that one I agree with. And then there was this other one that was actually a hack specific to IE that you put into a method named as much. And I thought, okay,
hack.
That makes sense. But the rest of it, though, the quote cleaning of the rest of it, where it was reducing lines. I was like, well, that's really not fair because I had like maybe because of the way I var things, and this was in JavaScript. So the way I var things up is I'll have like one per line, right? So I had like var some variable, comma some other variable, comma some other variable, and so a part of your cleaning of that was just getting rid of that, and you had replaced it with method calls to return back those values. But nothing was ever being varred, so it was constantly having to go back and reestablish what the variable was.
Okay, so I'll tell you why I did that. And I mean, out of context, this might be hard to follow, but basically what it was, there were the same chunk of like 4 or 5 vars in every single method.
No, this was only in one.
No, there were several. And the reason I know this was because the reason I even did it in the first place.
But because you moved them into multiple methods, that's why.
But the
original method was one method.
No, they were in multiple. And the reason I remember this is the whole reason I broke them out was because I was trying to chase down a bug that was completely not obvious. It was in the core framework that we were using, and it wasn't actually in the code we were doing. But in order to identify it, I kept having to put breakpoints all over the place where these same things were happening.
Okay, and this is why I'm bringing this up now, because at least...
But you're not going to let me finish. So the reason I broke them out, though...
Well, you said it because you said they were repeated.
So I wanted to make it to where I had one place to go to debug the code every single time. And that's what it boiled down to was instead of having to put breakpoints all over the place, I could put them in one method and say, okay, did this give me back what I needed? Yes. Okay, so cool. I know that's good.
So I can't comment on that because the pull request that I saw, my code was one method that had a section of stuff varred, and then that one method was split into a bunch of methods, and several of those methods were one-liners that returned back something, but instead of them being able to use a variable to get... So, like, picture you have a class that has, some other class that has some other class, and instead of each one being able to, having a reference to it, it was like recalculating the other class to get to their class.
No,
so
it
whatever.
actually
But
wasn't.
the point is, here's the point. Here's the point is that specific as it relates to this section is that like, how do you know when a function is doing more than one thing, right? And it's if you can extract another function from it where you can extract a function from it with a name that is not merely a restatement of the implementation, then it's doing more one thing. And that's what I'm saying here in this example was you had like methods where it was returning back like some object, but it was literally a one-liner that where I had it as a var statement before and that reference was saved and kept. Now it was something that was going to be called 3 more times by something else.
Not true, but basically what it was. So here's the way it worked. There was a var block.
I'm going to pull up this.
There was a var block, and we're not going to go on this for too long because it's kind of ridiculous, but there was a var block where the first variable set the second variable will build off the first one, third one build off the second one, fourth one, and it's the way that the framework works, right? So the problem was I needed to be able to access these things in different ways, in different points. So it wasn't like it was rebuilding it all the time. It would just be able to get to a reference because these things would look something like, it's EXTJS is what we were using, and it would be something like exts.lookupreference.something.something. And I was like, well, this is kind of ridiculous because I just need that tree. So I would say get tree, right? And so instead of having all these dots, to do something, I was like, hey, just get tree. So again, it was basically just so I could get things back and so it would read better because when you have a bunch of dots on a line that are, 60 characters long, it's hard to see what's going on. So anyways, yeah. I think we've beat it up enough. Did that part really need to be there? Not so much, but the cleanup that I did was more the reading.
Well, throughout. Yeah, but this was, specifically this was one method. To go back to that
point is that refactoring can be a little controversial sometimes.
Totally.
Well, no, but
I'm
yes,
totally
absolutely,
lost,
absolutely, it can be
on what this function looks
like. But the point that I was trying to get at was that if you're only creating a method that's how do they word it? If you're
restating what the variable is, but here's the thing.
Yeah, merely restatement of the implementation.
When there's a bunch of dots. Then that's really just a bunch of garbage, right? Because now you're saying, okay, I'm calling lookup reference to this, then I'm doing lookup reference, then I'm getting controller, then I'm doing this. So the whole purpose was I need this to read more like a narrative. Get me the tree instead of get this variable and then get its controller and then get it some value, right? That doesn't read well. So the purpose was readability. Read it like a narration. So again, I didn't even know this was his code.
No, that's why this was so beautiful. That's why I was like, oh, man, this would be awesome. We'll talk about this.
But the restatement thing was more so along the lines of the clean code was you should be able to read the thing, right? And that was not readable because that got into the, okay which variable am I using? And
just for the audience to be able to follow along here, okay, right? This method that I'm talking about had 4 var statements. One method call one if switch or one if statement where the if statement has one line, the else statement had one line, and then the IE hack that you pointed out that was also one line. Now calling out the IE part into its own thing, I thought, oh, that's awesome. That was a great idea. I liked renaming that specifically as an IE hack because that's what it was. So really there was this if statement that, even with, you have an if, an else, and then the 2 lines, one for the if and then one for the else. So 4 lines there, right? And then there was this other one check that was like, okay, you can make the argument that, is it doing more than one thing? Well, it's setting this state here and doing this if portion over here. So maybe you can make the argument there. But the point that I was getting at was that the 4 lines of the vars, I was like, well, that's not fair to call that as like cleaning up if all
I think
it was
you
doing...
took it out of context, though, because the cleanup was the entire pull request. It wasn't those 4 lines of code, right? So, again, I think this is way past being blown out of context in that the entire pull request was trying to fix a problem, and the only reason those things were pulled out like they were was so I could more easily debug, and the end state ended up being a little bit more readable than the beginning state. And so that's really what it boiled down to. The call out wasn't the 4 var lines. And the call
I guess
out wasn't
as I go back to this chapter though, or this entire book rather, is like there are things that they've said and done in this book that it's like where like I just clearly don't agree with, right? And you know, even in later parts of the book, like you mentioned it last time when we talked about there being I guess you said, I forget how you worded it, but something along the lines of you felt like there were not discrepancies, but contradictions. Thank you. And so there were things like that here too, but there are definitely things where like, you know, I didn't agree with, but then things that I did more agree with. But
here's my question though. Let's boil it down to the very end state. Was it better at the end of it than it was at the beginning? Not the VAR statements, not any particular one. Was it easier to read the method in the end state of the pull request?
Man, way to put me on the spot.
No, I mean,
I
but
felt
that's
that there
really
was
what
part
it boils
of
down
it.
to.
I felt that there was part of it that there was definitely part of it that I liked, but then there was definitely part of it that I didn't like.
And that's what I'm going to
say.
say. It's easy to dissect things, and this is my take on programmers in general.
Oh yeah, we're a finicky bunch.
And no, it's not that. If we took 10 programmers and we put us all in a room and we give us all the same exact task, you will get 10 different programs.
All right.
On that outcome. And so my thing is, and even with this, because I remember when you said something bothered you about it, I was like, what in the world bothered him? And I mean, seriously, I thought about it for 5 seconds and I was like, well, it couldn't have been a big deal. I only changed like 20 lines of code. But
but it was just more about like, you know, I enjoyed this conversation.
But on the flip side of it, I guess my point is everybody's going to have a slightly different take. And as long as you're leaving the code, as long as you're not making it worse, right? Then
Right.
you're doing a good job. And I would argue that anybody that looked at that, minus the VAR statements, minus anything else, if you look at that entire method that was done now, it's very readable from top to bottom, like a narration, because really the one thing that stuck in my head was that. Should you be able to read it?
Yeah, and so this is where I'm going with that. And so like, you know, you asked me if I thought it was better. Like, you know, there were some parts of it that I thought like I said, like I liked the fact that the IE8 hack was called out. But then there were other parts where I was like, well, I feel like you can over refactor something. Like we talked about in the last episode, the Boy Scout principle and going back and cleaning up something. And I thought that, well, you know, you can over refactor something or overdo something, right? And so the beauty of this was like this was a live example and you didn't even realize that it was mine that you did and then made the comment to. So I was like, oh, this is awesome, right? Like this is a great example. Yeah. But whatever. There was another point too, like going back to things that I strongly don't share an opinion or share the same opinion with the authors of the book is this step down rule, right? Where they were saying that, you know, to have the methods within the class listed, I believe this was the section, right? Where they wanted to have everything listed, you know, like one method as you know, to the next. Wait, is this the same one?
Well, the step down rule.
I think I'm thinking of further up in the book.
Well, the step down rule. No, it's down there. He just marked it in the show notes. The step down rule was everything should be at the same basic operating level.
Yeah, so it's like a nice hierarchy of organization.
Yeah. And that's actually the hardest.
That's not the one I was thinking of then. I was thinking there's another that I thought was referred to as the step down rule. There's another section in here where they talk about organizing your functions so that the caller is above the callee. So you always have your callee function below the callers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't remember if I saw that.
And I hated that when I saw that. Basically, like if you had a method, oh gosh, you know, that would be like create user, and inside of the create user method, it has a method called set name. Let's say that it calls, then set method would be listed below create user.
Yeah.
And the reason why I specifically hated that was I was like, well, you know, as you refactor these things over time, that's all going to change. Like, and here's the thing is like, I don't even have a good answer for this because my preference for this. Oh, why? Something crazy?
We've argued about this before. I just had a flashback to you and I like 3 years ago having this exact same conversation.
Oh,
and
really?
I won, by the way.
You did?
What'd you say?
Yeah, I convinced you. I guess you must have forgotten.
Well, we'll find out because my preference is to just put them in alphabetical order.
I hate that.
Yes, that's totally wrong.
The IDE gives you a drop down for the methods, and it puts it in alphabetical order.
so what? So you just put them in random order?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
see, that
No,
makes
not
even
random.
less sense. Like the author
I
of the
put my
book.
privates and my publics together, and past that, I don't care.
Okay, fine. I'm okay with organizing the privates and the publics. Having some categorization there, or like whatever the level is. I have less of a problem with. But to say that always categorize it so where, like, let's assume they're all public, and the create user is definitely ahead of the set user, or and let's say that there was a get see set user. No, I said set user name, right? So what could set user call that would possibly be alphabetically after? But let's say it calls some get method. The set username calls some get method that it just doesn't make sense to me to do that. So I would prefer to just have all the methods in alphabetical order. But even with refactoring the names could change too. So therefore, the order is going to change.
I don't
But to
like
just
that.
do them in random order, as what you're saying,
No,
That's
so
not random.
I'll take it back. I actually don't do random. I usually put, if we have sets and gets, I'll put those together, but I'll put the newest one at the end. That's almost always what I do, mainly because I don't want a bunch of things jumping around in code. Like the whole thing about renaming, I can't stand that. Like I don't know. If somebody
renaming?
No. If somebody renames, I don't want them to also move it because it just wreaks havoc on like.
Yep.
So what you're saying about putting them in alphabetical order? If you rename that thing and move it, you're going to confuse every single.
Well, that's
piece
why I
of
said I
comparison
don't have a
software.
good answer for this, because if you rename it and you leave it as is, now it's out of order.
Hey Joe,
right?
I feel like you were going to say something. What's your take on that?
I'm blowing my top over here, guys. It's totally incorrect. The book is spot on. And actually, I think I probably got all of my functional habits from this book because I agree with pretty much everything in this chapter. But I mean, you've got to have it in order, and these things do not move around like that. They don't swirl around like crazy. And if you're worried about stuff being called multiple times by multiple different public methods, then your class is probably too big and it's a monster class and doing something.
That's
if
an
your class is
interesting
small, then you should have mostly private methods. And most of those guys shouldn't really move around. You've got your function basically divided, and your public function divided into major sections. Like there's a part that gets the data, you do some logic, and then you do some presentation-y type stuff. And that stuff doesn't really move around too much.
Oh, man.
And
That's
it's
a good
nice that you
point.
can scroll
No.
past your public
Come
into your
on.
privates, and
No
then you
way,
basically
dude.
see them in the order that the public method calls them. It's so great to read like that.
No, man, because if you refactor some stuff and now all of a sudden some other method is calling it, or you break stuff apart, now all of a sudden the order could get out of whack.
I don't know, man. I still don't like the alphabetical thing because I don't like if a name changes that you're moving it around. I would actually.
But the same order could change based off of their recommendation about the function, the way you call it. The
Agreed.
callee should be below the caller.
Agreed. That's why I
you
put
could
my
change
new
some
ones
things
at the
around.
bottom of that section. Like I don't even worry about it. We have IDEs to answer these problems. There's no reason for you to manually
they had-
alphabetize things.
They had IDEs back then too.
Yeah, I don't know. Hey,
Don't
one other
get me
thing.
wrong. I'm not saying that I'll go and throw in a pull request where I've done nothing but change the order of the methods.
You actually
listed
complained to me
in-
about a PR a while back because I didn't put something in alphabetical order. I was like, I didn't even notice this. Like I
Because it was
seriously-
my code. That's why. That's why.
I was like,
really, man?
I was like,
really?
totally not changing this. I refuse.
Yeah,
to
I
change.
do hate seeing that. I'll see like 40 things in a row, like say it's some sort of config file or something, and then so I didn't do it in alphabetical order. I can't stand it.
Yeah,
I figured they're both equally arbitrary. Like, what does it matter? Because they're going to get refactored. Things are going to change. So really, alphabetical is just as good.
Hey, so going
No.
back real quick, so getting back to this whole thing, this actually comes from that PR that you were talking about earlier that I didn't even realize I had modified your code. One of the things I did is, and I like this in the book, and they actually say right here, code with an if blocks or statement should be one line long, meaning they should call a function. I don't know if that's overkill or not, but I ended up taking this approach because there was something like, hey, if this is the micro nav bar, before it said something like set width to 50 or something, right?
Right. That was the hard coded part that I like.
And then it would say else, if it's not the micro navigation, then set the width to 300,
Right.
we'll say. And instead what I did, and I liked it because it made sense, I said set micro nav size, right? And then I had another method that was like set, large or full nav size.
Yeah.
And that whole narration thing to me was just beautiful because it's easy enough to see that, hey, one was 50, so it was smaller, and the other one was 250, but it doesn't explain things as well, right?
Basically, for anyone trying to visualize what this piece of code did is if you've ever seen a navigation of an app or a site where you have a hamburger on the upper left or upper right, and you click that hamburger and some navigation
Grows.
Grows out, right? Then that's what this is. So this navigation could have either a miniaturized version of itself or a full width version of itself. And depending on what the state was, this method that was refactored, this method was responsible for flipping the state to one or the other.
Yep.
So you would pass in, or it would determine what the current state is and flip it to the other state. And so that's what he's referring to.
So yeah, just the readability, like, hey, set micro nav size or set full nav size. And that really stuck with me. I liked it. I think overall I usually code that way, but definitely in a lot of cases I would have probably just said set width 50, set width to 300, right? Just because in your head this is what you're doing, and so it's real easy to not just break that into another method that's really a one-liner, but it's very easy to read it when you go down through that.
Yeah, so those are the parts that I liked.
Yeah, so
Unvarring my vars.
oh, whatever. The next one that I'm curious as you guys' take is the indent shouldn't be more than 2 tabs, which basically means you shouldn't have much more than an if else, if anything else in there.
I think we may have covered something similar to this concept before with the code calisthenics concept.
I don't know.
Does that? I know Joe remembers that, right? You know what I'm talking about,
I
right?
know. I always complain about this in programming languages, particularly Python.
Oh, the tabbing actually means something to the language.
Yeah, well, I mean, with Python, I've seen like terrible scripts that have like 5 levels of indentation, and because Python doesn't have braces, it's like I end up like holding up a piece of paper on the screen and like scrolling down a VI, like, okay, where's this if end? Because someone wrote a really long function and had lots of levels of indentation, and both of those are pet peeves of mine.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that a method is really only, you might have one conditional and that's pretty much it. Or you have a bunch of method calls that each are doing different things. So I like it. I don't know that it's practical in every sense, but I do like the idea behind it.
So here was one that's kind of in the same vein as our last conversation, which was to use a descriptive name. And that long names are not a bad thing. Don't be afraid to use them.
Where was that?
Right here. See?
Oh, that's way far down.
Here, look. I'm going to show you my book.
Yeah,
Can you see that?
You're not looking at the show notes at all.
I'm just joking. Oh, man, that's boring.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the name should tell you exactly what it does, like it's at an instance. But with that, there also came the whole idea that you should use standard type names, right? Like set or get or standards in Java or do or, something like that.
Oh, man, it drives me crazy when gets do other things, which happens all the time.
Yes,
totally. You say get first name, it goes out, queries something in a database, stores it in cache, and then returns. Man, that's not getting, that's doing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think the idea was that your functions should be verb names and your properties should be noun names.
Yep.
Yeah,
right.
I do like that. I just don't like when functions do too much, and so you might do something like, "Hey, get me elements out of this array," and it actually removes the other elements, or it just modifies some sort of other state and stuff, and
or it sorts it in order to
really
get it
apparent from the yeah.
So
none of that.
But as it relates to the names, though, especially the long names, like it made me think because especially my unit test names get really long. Like really long.
Yeah, they should be descriptive, right?
Yeah, because I try to write my unit test to where, there's no comments there. From the unit test name alone, you can get an idea as to what I'm testing, the method that I'm trying to test, and what I'm trying, the scenario that I'm trying to test, and what I expect to happen as a result of that, all in the name.
And so you can look at it and
they get
know.
really long.
Yeah, I mean, but it's nice because when you see that they've passed or failed, you know exactly what passed or failed without going and looking at the code.
Yeah.
Which is what you want. Getting into your, well, Joe's got this highlighted. One way to know if you named it well is to put 2 on the function name and see if it does what you think it should.
Oh, right.
I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, but no, wasn't that
string?
To get first name, right? To get last name. Does it actually do it? To set first name, to set last name, or
no? That was based off of the logo language, which is one that I'm not familiar with, but it used the keyword to in the same way that Ruby and Python would use def.
Oh.
And so they were saying if you could
that's cool.
describe it within the to format.
So I'm not defining this function. I'm saying to do this action does this.
Yes.
So it's just a different way of thinking about it. Okay.
Yeah. We can describe the function by describing it as a brief to paragraph.
Making it a verb.
Right.
The thing that we started to talk about earlier, the step down rule, was kind of interesting, and honestly, I think is probably one of the most difficult things to do, was keeping things on the same level of abstraction. Like in the book, they had a code example where they were doing like a setup and a tear down of some sort of method, and it was doing things like getting HTML and setting paths and all that kind of stuff. And they said, keeping things on the same level, you actually have to think about, because get HTML doesn't belong in the same place as get path, doesn't belong in the same place as path.append. Like, they're all different levels of abstraction, and that can be difficult.
Oh, man. I tell you, the worst methods I've ever written in my life have all been refactors of existing code, where I just started kind of starting to separate stuff out. Like, I'm going to grab these 6 lines, refactor those to a new method. And then, the refactoring tool will grab all the arguments and stuff that it touches. And next thing you know, it's like, whoa, I'm passing in 7 arguments. 2 of them are outs and it returns something.
Oh, God.
And you start looking at the code, and it didn't look so bad when it was in the function. But then when you realize, when you start to refactor that the reason it's doing that is because it's all mixed together. It's grabbing data, it's doing some logic on it, it's rearranging it for output, all in the same kind of spot, and then you've got like a 400-line function that does this sort of stuff. But once you need to start rearranging these things or changing the presentation, you realize that now you've got to also start changing your data code and your logic code and your all sorts of stuff, and it's just got its fingers everywhere, and you can see that it's total spaghetti. But none of that was visible when you first looked at that function, because if you read it top to bottom, it kind of made sense.
And
but it just wasn't organized very well.
Yeah, and that's where you just give up and you're like, I'm just going to commit this as is and move on.
And
sometimes you have to.
And you know what? That's a killer comment and a call out, because what you just said with those refactors is the problem is there's not enough abstraction, right? Because what you were just saying with all those, these out variables and all this setup, and it's going and doing all this stuff, because it's not abstracted well, you can't pull it out. You can't just refactor it into a new method. You've really got to start thinking about, do I need to create another class that'll do this, right? And then does that need to have another class that does some other things? And it becomes a major effort.
Yep, and so I figure it's kind of like the Boy Scout rule. So by first, just kind of extracting out those methods for the part, even if it does mean having multiple arguments and other really gross stuff, I do think of it as an example of the Boy Scout rule, where I'm not changing things too much, but I'm at least showing what the problems are, because before they were hidden. And so I'm not actually making things worse. I'm just exposing the problems that were there.
So what about breaking your function up into sections?
It means it's too long.
That's what they say.
What about SQL, though? Because that's where I do a lot of banners. Like, here are my declares. Here's the 60-line query that does this part.
Well, I feel like the one place where this is totally acceptable, and this is fighting words if you don't agree, would be in the unit test, though. Because I like the I think they call it something else in the book, if I remember right, but I know it now as the arrange, act, and assert format. So you'll have 3 sections of your code. One section is where you're just arranging the state that you want to test. There's the act, where you're going to actually do whatever action you expect you're trying to test. And then the assert is where you're going to test the result of that action.
That's interesting. I mean, you could break those down into private methods, right? That do the arrange, the act, and
That's
the
exhausting.
It would,
and
be.
the arrange would be annoying because you're usually setting a bunch of variables. So it's like, are you going to write a class then and return that class for every?
No, that'd be horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
every
it
test would be
as
3
readable.
private methods and a class.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in unit
that's what I'm saying.
tests-
Like unit test is the one place where I feel like this is acceptable.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because also too, like, yeah, because what happens now when you want to have, okay, let's say you did break it out into methods. Let's not even talk about classes, but you have one methods where, I don't even know what that method name might look like, but it's got to be descriptive because that's what they said over here on page 38.
It would basically be the same
30,
name,
40,
name of your
39
method with arrange. Right? It'd be
it
do
would be
something,
horrible.
arrange.
Arrange, and then here's the state name, whatever you're going to set up, and arrange integers that might overflow the buffer as the method name, maybe. But then as soon as you start having like more than that one method using that same thing, and they need
ugly.
to change something, now it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have 2 versions of this method, one that's slightly different. Yeah, that's just gross, man. Just keep your... I think in unit tests this is okay. Because also, your unit test should be small enough anyways.
Yeah, agreed.
What's the longest unit test you've ever written, Joe?
Oh, you don't want to ask me that. I'm sure it's been terrible.
Okay.
3 lines.
Because my unit test... where I was going with that, though, is the unit tests are normally like, 10-ish lines, maybe?
Yeah, they're not
they're
terrible.
not usually big. Because, there's a couple where you're setting the variables, and then the rest is just, one method, one assert.
Yep.
Yeah, I've done some terrible things though, like initializing huge objects and stuff.
Some terrible things.
Yeah, I really have.
And you can watch
I
all
should
that
be
on
shocked.
YouTube here in the near future.
I'm the guy that, like when I've been that guy when you're looking at some code and you're like, who did this?
Apparently, Alan thought that when he refactored some of my stuff. I'm just saying.
Next time, I'm not sending him the pull request.
Yeah, I know. That was the most amazing part.
So this next point, the smaller and more focused a function, the easier it is to name. That kind of just goes with saying, right? Like that kind of makes sense. Don't be afraid to make a long name. That's what we said a little while ago. This one. I have been the person who did this in the past, and after reading this, I felt so ashamed. A long name is better than a long comment.
Very true.
I mean,
I've read some of your comments.
hey, look, man, our buddy Will argued this with me a while back, and I think he might have even referenced clean code. I was like, get out of here, man. And then after, when I read this, I was like, you know what, man, he's so right. Like, if you have to write a super long comment to describe what the method's doing, there's something wrong.
Right.
Right? And sometimes I found myself writing these comments about methods that existed, right? And probably I should have done the Boy Scout rule and gone back and cleaned it up to make it more
Just rename the method.
descriptive or something like that.
Right.
So +1 to Will on this one. I definitely took a -1, and it kind of hurt a little bit when I read that.
Yeah, I feel like with today's tools, man, to refactor, to change the name of a method or a variable, it's so ridiculously simple. The only reason why I could even think that you might want to hesitate on it is if you're fixing, bug A, and then to make this other change B, it's such like a class, for example, or a method that is so widely used that in order to make that change and commit it, you're going to completely hide the bug fix that you're trying to make. That's the only reason why I could think that, well, maybe do that in a separate commit.
Yeah, and that can happen. I've definitely seen it where a whole page is cleaned up and you're like, man, I don't even know what I'm looking at here.
We've actually talked about this too. I think going back to it might have been, what's the source control etiquette episode 3, I think maybe.
Good Lord, was it that long ago?
Yeah, it was a while back. But I remember we talked about it at one point, like this pattern that I've followed before that maybe I haven't been as diligent about here in recent months, but I've definitely done this before where, like, let's say I have some ticket and I like to create my branches off of whatever the ticket number is just because it makes it easy for me to see what it is later. And a lot of tools, if you include that as part of your commit message, it can link it up as well. So if I have a bug 123 that I'm working in branch 123, and I see an opportunity to do a refactoring, but it is gigantic, then I'll put the pull request in for branch 123, and then I'll create a new branch called something like 123 cleanup.
Nice.
And then it builds off of the bug fix of 123, right?
Yep.
And then it does all the cleanup, and it's a pull request back into 123.
I like that.
So it's like, okay, here you can see this pull request by itself in isolation, but if you also like this other fix, then you can approve it too.
Yeah, I like that. It's a nice way to separate it. Yeah.
So it came up, I think, in the last episode, and I forgot. I remembered as I after that episode about that workflow, so I thought I'd mention that again.
Cool. All right, so the next one, we are definitely not getting through the next chapter. I think we're like a third of the way through this one, so we're gonna have to.
No, totally.
That's crazy.
All right, let's talk about function arguments. Well, I mean, we've already done enough arguing, so can't we just get along?
It's all done.
I mean,
functions have arguments. That's what you
now
need
you
to
see how our pull requests go. Do you remember, this is where I started, the difference between good code and bad code was that drawing where it was measured by the number of what WTFs per minute, right? That's the difference.
That's so accurate.
Well, this was interesting because it was very specific about how many functions you should, or how many arguments you should pass in.
Totally.
Yeah, it started using words. I was like, well, I guess that's a word.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really interesting. So basically they say never use more than 2 arguments, which seems small to me, but maybe I'm terrible.
Nah, man. You know what? I totally agree with this one. I remember back in the days, and I'll go back to JavaScript, you would see things where people would just keep amending a function, right? And all of a sudden there's 12 arguments in it. And I was like, I can't deal with this. And then I don't remember if it was jQuery or what came out, where you started seeing people pass around configuration objects. And I was like, totally, that's how it should be done. And it's the same thing in OO, right? You have classes that you pass in or whatever. I can't stand passing in more than one or two arguments.
Yeah, but I do hate it, though, where I feel like it's easy to get into a DTO clutter, right?
It happens.
You have a bunch of these little DTO objects, or POJOs or POCOs, whatever you choose to call them, that just clutter up your code just because you needed to be able to pass something around.
Yeah, I hate creating one class just to pass something to or from a function.
I mean, this is where maybe if I take the opposite stand here and get into Bizarro world, and tonight I'm going to on JavaScript and say this is the beauty of it is you could just have these free flowing types
objects
that you don't have to have these definitions hanging around.
Yeah, but how many times have you had to look at a function just to see what the options are for passing in, and you go down to line 17 of the function and realize, oh, okay, I could have passed this argument too.
Yeah. Okay.
As
so
part of that
now we're back
object.
to normal Michael, and I'm back to hating on JavaScript. Forget it.
But hold on.
You know what?
When you said, Joe, when you said you jump down and you look at something and it says, oh, well, I could have passed this too. Are you talking about within the object itself? Or are you talking about okay.
Functions that take a config object or something are sometimes optional arguments. And so the config object in particular, sometimes it'll accept all sorts of stuff, and you scroll down and you have to look and see what all is being used there if there's not good documentation for it, and there rarely is.
Yeah.
But I think we're maybe, if I remember right, where they were going, though, is that it might be that if you're taking that many functions or parameter arguments in, that maybe you're doing too much.
Well, they also say testing becomes extremely difficult because the permutations of those arguments, every time you add one, that's one more factorial towards the number of testing scenarios you've got to deal with. And that is an awesome point, right? I mean, it really is. The more arguments you add, the more difficult it is to isolate things to that one particular method.
Yeah, but to play devil's advocate, I like to create functions and classes that take in the minimal required information. So I don't like to take a person object if all I need is a name, something like that, because I want to express to my callers, this is what I need, this is what I'm acting on, and I can operate on more than a person object. I operate on just the things that I need. And so if you don't take this stuff in via functions, then you have to define them as properties or some other way of getting that information. And so when you do it as a property, then you're kind of hiding it, and it's harder for people to see what exactly needs to be passed in order to get your function to work. But I don't want to have 6 arguments, but it just 2 seems a little too few for me.
Well, in your example, though, a side effect of doing the way you described it is you're also increasing the potential for reusability because you're not tying it to a specific type. I think you said name, right, in your example. Yep. Then, you're opening up the possibilities for other callers to use their own types but still be able to call it.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll even do an interface, call it like I name haver. And I'll just slap it on the person object or anyone else that has a name or, whatever properties I need. And so then it's a clear signal like these are the guys that I need. And I won't use an interface that has more properties that I'm not using because then I don't want my callers to think, okay, well, I'm not actually passing anything except for name. What should I set all these other properties to? It's just confusing.
But I name haver, we got to work on your naming there, buddy. You wouldn't want to do I name havable or I nameable.
Hey,
or
I namey?
that reminds me though. Somebody in Slack recently, I think in our Dev Talk channel, said something like you should never name a method with ER on the end, right? Like manager or.
Oh no, that was in,
or was that in here?
That was part of this. We were talking about this last time but they were talking about like properties. I think it was like you shouldn't have controller, manager, helper.
Yeah,
those were the names to stay away from. And I brought it up last time that I thought that wasn't fair because as it relates to MVC, everybody knows what a controller is. So if your variable name had the word controller in it, then it's immediately obvious to everybody what it is. And actually, we got a comment about that in the episode 47 comments here, and I'm trying to find who it was so I can give proper credit, but I may not do it. I might not be able to find it in time. But someone wrote in saying something along the lines of, well, I think that's probably not what they meant. Here it is. It was Brian, and he said that the proposal that he thinks that the proposal against using controller as a class name will be in the context of controller versus manager and not in controller in the context of MVC. And in the case of MVC, controller seems like the standard programming nomenclature like factory or visitor or comparer.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I agree with that. I at least I hope that's where the author's, head is at.
Yeah, I agree. Now, going back to your name though, Joe, you need to make it says like something like I has name.
Yeah.
I has name.
And then you can put some sort of meme on it with a cat.
Know what?
Right?
You know what, Alan? You just started something, and I'm going to have to go back and name all of my interfaces I has
name. It's got to be HAZ because it's got to be like a cat meme or something.
Yeah. With some little ASCII art above each each declaration.
Hey, and so going back to what you said a second ago, though, Joe, is like you don't like hiding things in properties. Like this author was kind of more for that, right? Like they were talking about nolatic methods that take no arguments, basically meaning that the object already has state and you're just acting upon that state, right?
Yeah. I think it's more pure OO. And these days I kind of lean a little bit more functional, so I do more static-y type stuff. I take more arguments and I try to modify state as little as possible. So I think it's just kind of a my personal evolution, and hopefully it's not a devolution.
Well, the argument that they were kind of going with, though, and just to build upon what Alan was saying, is that these arguments that what they were arguing for here in this section was that instead of passing the arguments in, that those should already be properties of your class that you're acting on. And the more there's more cohesion if your methods are acting on more of those variables, right? But I'm with you though, like Joe, where if I can make something act more functional, then those are a heck of a lot easier to test. To write unit tests for.
I like that, but I still like the idea of passing it in one object. as opposed to 6 arguments or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever. So you can pass in the state of something, even though if we were talking about functional, the only real difference is it can't modify it, right? Like it can't mutate what you passed in, but it can return you a new version of whatever it's looking for. So I still like the idea of smaller or fewer arguments.
Well, yeah, so like the concept too, though, that if you need that many arguments, maybe you're doing too much.
Possibly.
Like, really, what's an example of where you might need something? I mean, like in the last episode, we had talked about my inability to tell you the ingredients of a particular
Supreme
pizza. So, which you found difficult to believe. You know, I mean, that was an example where, you know, okay, you could have this pizza constructor, and, you know, if you're not careful about how you think about the structure of your code, sure, you could have one that takes no variables, one that takes one variable, all the way up to one that takes 15 variables of different things that you want to try to make, instead of, you know, what the book recommends doing would be to use the
static,
the factory method pattern, where you have a create supreme pizza method that doesn't need you to pass in the ingredients. It already knows, and it just returns back the object type. That's about the only example that I could think of where I might want a really long list of variables that isn't like a params, you know,
right? A
type,
list.
you know, a list of things. So,
Right.
like in the case of, like a what you might pass into like a string format method,
Right.
or a string buffer, or something like that. You know, where, you know, it could be some infinite list of things. Like that's not being counted here in this particular section of the
No,
book.
That
But
was one argument.
well, they're
basically.
counting it as one. Yes,
Yeah.
they're not counting it as the infinite list. They're counting it only as the one.
Yep. So then the other one that they mentioned that they brought up in the book was called monadic, which is it takes in a single argument, and that's usually a decision argument, like, you know, do this or don't do this. You know, like if you had something like make visible, you'd pass in true or false, right? So it was kind of like a decision thing. So
Well,
They
I wouldn't
said-
word it that way, though, right? Because there was a section in the book where they referred to that. I think that was the flag section, where they were saying like this felt wrong because then, depending on what was passed in, the method does one of two things.
Yeah.
So if you have like a Boolean was a particular example. You know, if you're passing in true, then the method is going to act one way, versus if you pass in false, it's going to do something completely different. So that's
I
why I'm
was
saying,
wrong.
like, don't call it the decision.
yeah, it's actually wrong. So when you take in a single argument, you're asking about that argument, transforming and returning. So you're actually acting on it. It's not a decision point. So I take that back. You are correct. The flag stuff is further on, and they don't like that.
Yeah.
The monadic was when you were actually trying to either modify or change something about it.
Oh, that reminds me. There was actually like a. Oh, it was here. It is the command query
Yep.
section.
That pattern.
Yeah, command query separation.
So let's finish up on these function arguments. The other ones were the monadic they typically use events.
We'll come back to command query separation. Then.
Yes, we'll be going down to it. And then the other one was they were basically saying don't use output variables, which I can agree with, but it is funny. Like if you look at a lot of the .NET stuff, like you've got try parse, you know, or I mean, pretty much anything that has a try parse has an out variable on it, right? And those are kind of nasty to test out properly. And it's not obvious, right? Like you got to put out in your call, and so
Right.
it's not a clean read.
It's a way of cheating the system to have two returns.
Yes.
So the counter to that would be to have some object that you return that has the multiple things,
Right.
the multiple values, instead of having them having them each independently.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel as strongly about that, but I guess I do, though, because I really don't like having to use the out keyword, and every time I do, I feel a little dirty.
Yep.
And especially like you mentioned, like the try parse examples, which, you know, specific to .NET's syntax here. You know, so for those not familiar, if I want to parse some string as an integer, there's an int.tryParse method. The first variable that you pass in would be the string, and the second variable would be an integer out call, and the try parse method itself returns back a Boolean as to whether or not it was successful or not. So you could say if int.tryparse string, or my string, comma, out my int, right? And then, carry on about your day. Then you know that the try parse either failed or not. Versus if you didn't do that and you only had the try parse return back, a number, to represent that integer, then how do you know if it didn't? Right? Like, how do you know when? Like, because this is an example where 0 could be a valid value for that integer. So you can't use 0 as your false. Right?
Yeah. And like you said, instead of doing the out in the method call, you could have just had that method return an object that had successful, true or false.
Try parse result.
Right. Something like that. So, there's a way around those things.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine like what our code would look like if we did have that though. Like let's talk about the try parse example. Like if you had a try parse, so you want to say if int.tryparse, now you have to have some value. So if int.tryparse and then open close parentheses, and we'll ignore what's in there, dot
successful.
Yeah, dot successful. Right? Now it's a little weird.
But it
that's
reads
a little
better.
weird too.
It still reads a little bit better though, right? Because otherwise you're having to set a variable to it, right? And then you're saying, hey,
but you'd have to set that variable because you've already lost the value now.
Oh, that's a good point.
So you couldn't,
because you'd be reevaluating.
Right. So you'd have to say like var result equals int.tryparse. If result dot successful, then my int equal result dot value or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, at least it's consistent. And we've also said on here before, consistency a lot of times is just as good, if not better, than some sort of clean code.
Hey, before we get into the next section here with flag arguments, you want to do how about we get into a little call to action here?
Yeah, so I ain't too proud to beg. You guys have been killer. I mean, we got a lot of great reviews this last go around, and we read them all. I mean, for those that go and just click the ratings, awesome. We appreciate it. That helps too. But for those of you that actually take the time to sit down and write something to let us know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, all that, and just the thank yous and we've helped or whatever, that is a huge payment to us. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I mean, in all honesty, that is probably one of the biggest things you guys can do for us besides come and join us in Slack for fun. But, yeah, I mean, seriously, if you guys have the chance, if you remember when you get out of your car, you get off your lawnmower, please do take 5 minutes, go up there, head to www.codingblocks.net/review, click on either iTunes or Stitcher, and, take the time to pin something into us because it really does make our day, and it truly helps us out in more ways than you can imagine. So thank you, and please do if you get a chance.
All right. So with that, I want to get into my favorite section of the show. This the survey says. Yeah, we're gonna family feud this guy. All right. So Joe, you weren't there, but you get to participate anyways. So the question asked in the last episode is, do you regularly attend meetups or conferences? You had 3 choices. Yes, I need to get out of my cave every now and then, which really, I think that was supposed to be command center. It's supposed to be, I got to get out of my command center because it's not just a cave. It's a command center. See all my monitors? It's a command center. And then there's the other option, which is, no, ain't nobody got time for that, right? Or the third option is, I think this is the one where I sang last time and you changed it, right? This is.
I left it in there.
Did you? No,
I left it in the show, but I didn't.
Oh, in the
write
show,
the
yes.
name.
Okay, yeah. So the third option is no. I live light years away from any meetups or conferences because I live in the jungle, baby. Hey, man, You sang about Broken Dev.
I did.
All right. So
I even sang. We all sang tonight. How about that?
So now that we have serenaded you with song, those are your three choices now, Alan. Well, no, I tell you what, Joe, since you're back with us, I'll let you go first. You get first pick. Yes, I need to leave my command center. No, no one's got time for that. Or 3, no, I live too far away.
There's no IRSVP and then don't go option.
I feel like that applies to both of the no's.
Can I give you like a 1.2 or A.B? I think number one with 60% of people listening to this podcast do go to they get out of their caves.
All right.
You were crazy optimistic, my man.
So yes. Wow. Listen to Mr. Pessimistic here. The glass is only half full with this guy.
I feel like people at the end of the day are tired of coding, and they're like, ain't nobody got time for that. So I'm going to say that was the majority at 40%.
I feel like you cheated.
Did I get it right? I have not looked at anything, I promise.
You liar.
I have not looked. How close was I?
All right, so here's okay. So by Price is Right rules, I'm going to go ahead and say that he cheated, Josie. You won.
All right,
but unfortunately, by Price is Right rules, you lost too.
I went over.
So no, because I say you cheated.
Oh, yeah.
So the winner was no, ain't nobody got time for that, and it had 40% of the vote.
Are you serious?
Now you see why I know that he cheated.
I got skills. I'm just
Nobody
saying.
pulls that off. That doesn't happen.
That's amazing.
All right. So, we'll let the cheater keep playing. But so the survey for this episode is define your preferred work environment. Do you prefer to work in a cubicle or an open floor plan where there's no dividers between you and your coworkers, and you can hear all of their conversations, and they can hear all of yours? You might say that I've already shown a little slight preference to the cubicle over the open floor plan, but you'd be wrong, because also you have work from home. Yay! Get to work in your pajamas. Or there's the private office, where I guess that would be in an office building. So let's make that clear. That's in an office building, but you have your own private office. You can close the door if you need some quiet, because everyone out there in that open floor plan is just way too loud. Or you don't even like that. You want to work remote, but from a place of your choosing, like a coffee shop. So that's going to be our survey for the next episode.
And that came from Slack. That was a conversation we had on Slack today, which you can join in on the fun by going to www.codingblocks.net/Slack. And you can put in your email there and join the party.
Yep. And hear all the crazy things that we say. Starting with, we've already talked about the flags. So let's get into verbs and keywords.
Did we hit all the where did it go?
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, pretty much.
So,
we're up on my favorite one. Can I introduce this one?
Please do.
Oh.
Your function should not have side effects. If it says it does one thing, it should only do that one thing. And I even take that to mean, and especially mean, actually, you should not modify the arguments that are passed in. So if you have a get, it should not also do some setting. Smart properties are nice for some things, but I try to minimize them for the same reason. But to me, the biggies are just not modifying unexpected things, especially the arguments that are passed in, unless it's very clear via the function name that it is destructive. I hate the JavaScript's slice and splice sound so similar, and one ruins your array and the other doesn't.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the point
substring and substir are the same way. One of them ruins and the other doesn't, and I never remember which one.
This goes back to the point that you made earlier, though, about don't set something if you're just trying to get something.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And we've probably all done it at some point, right? You're like, oh man, this thing wasn't
Nope,
initialized.
never.
No,
Come on.
Whatever.
You've seen my code.
Man, I did it yesterday. No, I probably didn't. I wasn't coding yesterday, so I could say that. I totally did not do that yesterday. It was last week sometime.
You know what?
no, I'm
Though?
going to check your pull request now.
Ruby, and actually we should have mentioned Golang, and I think there's a few other languages that are really good about passing back more than one argument that kind of avoids or more than one return that avoids the problem with the out. But just like that, Ruby has a great convention for functions that are destructive, and the convention is to put a bang, an exclamation point at the end. So if you do like string dot, slice bang, that means that your original argument will be modified. No bang, then it returns a copy of it that has been modified.
Man, I forgot about that. Hey, this reminds me of a previous tip. Go to codeschool.com. No, wait, what was the name? Codecademy. Codecademy. You can take a whole class on it, and it teaches you things like that. At any rate, go ahead. That's amazing.
Teaches
I forgot about
you things like Ruby?
Like you could take the Ruby class and it'll teach you like that. Bang does the destructive versus the not. Like you learn a lot of cool things about that, and that is a great.
But you were saying that was by convention, not by
convention. Yes,
by compiler or whatever.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So no guarantee, but yeah, if I pass you an object, don't muck around with my object. Although I do that sort of thing in private methods all the time, because a lot of times I write like little helper methods because I'm lazy and don't want to copy paste stuff, and so I'll do gross things like take in a list and then add items to it based on a condition or something. But with privates, I feel like you can get away with that sort of thing a little bit, but you just have to be really careful. And a lot of times I'll put comments that say like, warning, this appends to the list, or this will clear the list out before it refills it, or something like that.
I didn't understand what you meant about the smart properties, though, or I didn't know where you were going with that.
Yeah, just a lot of times you'll have a getter or a setter that just does other stuff. Like you'll say, class name dot name. You'll be getting it, and it will go out, fetch the record from the database, and then return the name. And it's not apparent to you that you are querying, and so you may be doing this object.name in several places, and it turns out in the background you've run 8 queries. Whereas if you knew that it was doing that, you would have cached it off to a variable and only used it once.
If it was called get name from database.
Right.
Yeah. And so smart properties in particular are easy to hide stuff like that. I've seen stuff like that where every time you call the get, it like wipes out the old collection, repopulates it, whatever, just does some work. And I probably wrote that code, which is nasty because I know I've done stuff like that before. But I just don't like stuff that does that. And so I try to avoid smart properties, even though I understand that the whole benefit of doing properties versus just, variables is that you can make them smart later without changing any code. But don't make them smart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I know I've done examples where like I'll have some property and you'll do a get on it, and then the get will check to see like whatever the backing field is for that. Hey, has this thing been initialized? If not, let's set a lock and then initialize it and release the lock, and then I'll return it back. But I mean, I guess technically you could say like, well, that might be doing more than it should be. Is that where you're going with it?
Well, I actually just came up with a joke right now on the fly that I think exemplifies this pretty well.
Oh, this should go over well.
Yeah. When is a property not equal to a property? Datetime.now.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
If datetime.now equals datetime.now,
it won't equel. Or well, actually, it probably would.
They're both properties.
But they probably would. I don't know. That's a good question. Because it could be one tick off, right?
Yeah, don't ever write that code.
Because .now is actually acting like a method, right? It's not.
Right.
It's acting like a method even though it's a property. So I get what you're saying.
It's a method in disguise.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Right, so that actually
bugs me.
Bad about it.
That actually bugs me too, by the way. Anytime I'm using the datetime.now, that frustrates me because I think it needs parentheses. I put it on there and then I get an error and I'm like, okay, I'll take them off. The next thing that I actually like, and this bugs me to no end, so as passionate as you were about it only doing one thing, I do not like it when I have to go look at a method signature to figure out what that thing needs or is doing, right? Like it says right here, avoid making methods that are required to inspect the declaration. Your method shouldn't be named something, or it should be named something that identifies its true intention. I totally agree with that, man. I can't stand it when I've got to go read a method to figure out what in the world is actually happening in that thing, right? It drives me absolutely crazy. And that goes back to the whole 3-minute or 1 minute thing that we said earlier, right?
Oh, right.
You should be able to know just by reading it exactly what you're
That still
you're
might
getting.
be my favorite takeaway from this book, though, is the 3-minute method. I feel like
7-minute abs.
yeah, I feel like that's where we're going. No, man, it's a 2-minute method because it's better.
1 minute.
That's just stupid. Nobody would do that.
For anybody who gets that reference, that's golden.
Brett Favre. He would get it. All right, so let's go back to the command query separation concept here. So functions should either do something or answer something, but not do both.
Woohoo!
So that's really the idea here.
Yeah, that's just what Joe said. If you have something that says get, it shouldn't be doing anything. It should be returning a variable, right? If you have something that says set, it really shouldn't be doing, well, what if you go to set something and it requires other information on an object for it? Yeah, you still,
This is where it's doing more than one thing.
You're not mutating state, though. That's really
so
the
if
key,
you
right?
have to, if you can't separate those two, then your method is doing too much.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Okay.
I didn't write the book.
Yeah, true. Prefer exceptions as opposed to error codes. I 100,000% agree with this. I hate error codes. You too? Dude, yep. SQL Server, stored procedures are the worst, right? If you return a 0, then that means everything's good. If you return 10, you got to go look at the proc to figure out what the author meant by 10, and then 20 and 30 and 100. Man, I cannot stand error codes at all. I hate them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and somewhere you have to define them, and it just gets nasty. And then what inevitably happens is like you don't want to create another error code set, so you end up like using one from somewhere else, and somebody adds to it, and now yours can potentially return something that it would never return, and it just gets ugly.
So I won't say I'm not as passionate about it as you. You definitely have a lot of hate in your heart.
I do. I don't like error codes.
But I mean, I see it as dated, is the way I view it. Like it was there was a time where this was a necessary thing, right? So if you were chaining together a bunch of commands, like command line, not parameters, but command line commands. I guess if we could have another command in there.
Arguments?
No, that's why I said not. No, you're on a command line and you're going to chain one command into the next, right? Then having a non-zero error code, or value come back, right? I mean, there was a time for that. That's where it made sense, right?
H result.
But
what'd you say?
H results. Remember seeing H results? Let's say you're dealing with C++ code.
Yeah, totally.
Going back to like Win32 programming.
Okay,
but I'm not even talking about H results though. By the way,
you're talking about a holdover. But why does SQL Server still use return codes for a proc? Right? Like, come on, man. Seriously, come on. Give me something real. Like
I feel like
SQL
this conversation
SQL
isn't
needs
fair,
some
though.
syntax updates.
Because SQL in general, I mean, not just SQL Server, but just SQL in general is just really outdated.
It is. It is.
It's
and it's amazing
time.
what all we still do with it. I mean,
it's amazing we still can.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but then, you're amazed with that, and then look at all the wonderful things you can do with Perl.
I'd rather not.
Oh, sorry.
Hurts my eyes.
So what about this statement, which was to extract your try-catch blocks?
Love it. I'll tell you why. I love throwing exceptions. I love very specific exceptions. Like I'll have validate methods, and they'll take a look at some things, and they'll throw some very specific argument that gets logged to disk somewhere or something, gets returned to the UI. It's fantastic. I hate catching. I want as few catches as I can get away with. I want that to be the top most level thing. That's who decides what to do when something goes wrong. I don't want a bunch of people catching and trying to make decisions along the way. Especially if you are a third party, you're dealing with third parties. Don't cover it up. toss it up, and I will deal with it at the appropriate level of abstraction for my specific purpose.
I agree with that. I like that a lot. And I do like what they said very next was your try should be the very beginning of the method, and your catch or finally or whatever should be the very end.
Well, yeah, it was specifically what I liked was that error handling is one thing.
Yes.
Right? So if your method does one thing and you have to do error handling, then that's it. That's the one thing that it gets to do.
Yep.
It has, something else has to be called to do whatever other work that you wanted done.
Yep. So you have your try, and then you have do something, right? And then that's going to catch whatever error happens, and that gets thrown back out. So
then that's where you catch like one of Joe's 15 exceptions.
Yeah. Well, they're all just regular exceptions, though. So you catch them.
Oh, that's
with Java, man, I like the idea that I can call a method and see very explicitly, like, these are the types of exceptions that I'll throw, except that everybody gets tired of writing all that, and they all just say throws exception.
Yeah, they throw new exception, right? Just your generic run-of-the-mill exception.
Oh, that's actually later called out as a problem in the book, though. They call that, they do address that later in the book as a refactoring problem.
Yeah, because it starts out, you're like, oh, well, I throw IO exception or I throw argument exception. And next thing you know, you're like, oh, but now I call this line thing and it returns this. And so I need to go add to my function. Or nope, I just throw exception.
Well, it was something that
generic one.
It was something that the Java community as a whole kind of addressed or admitted as like a fault of the language. That sounds harsh to call it a fault of the language. Because I don't mean it to sound
something
that
that
harshly.
could use improvement.
It is. It sucks.
But because what it was doing is it was kind of carrying forward a dependency here. Like I throw an IO exception. Now you call me. Well, guess what? If you're not catching that, you're going to have to include that as part of your declaration. And whoever calls your method, guess what? If they're not going to catch it, they got to include it as part of their declaration. So in the very end, like I said, IO exception. So that was like very generic. But what if I had a very specific exception like coding blocks IO exception because Alan didn't like Michael's code and Michael rejected that PR, right? That's a very specific exception that got thrown. And now, but that piece of code in its declaration, it gets, passed all the way up. So now callers way up the chain might have to know about it. And now let's say I go and refactor that thing because I'm like, wow, that was a really long name. I don't even remember what it was. Just call it coding blocks exception because Michael's crazy.
Everything.
Then there's a whole bunch of code that you got to go back and change.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Well, except that everyone got lazy somewhere along the line and just started saying exception.
Yeah, throw a new exception.
So it's totally worthless.
Which is to our benefit. Thank you.
Which is
It
basically
made it so much easier because I don't even remember what the name of that exception was that I made.
Put the string in there and be done with it, right? That's what most people do. So the next section, I actually love this. Don't duplicate code. I've actually had people kind of laugh at me. Like if I have something that's doing something and then there's another thing that's like like another instance of that object and they're checking the same thing, I won't do that. I cannot stand it. I will combine those two things in an array and then do a loop over them to do that same method, right? So let's say that you have a bunch of logic that's happening on object 1 and then you've got that same object acting on object 2 because they're instances of the same class. I'll put those in an array, do a loop over them, and have it, just iterate over the items and do the same logic on both of them. Even though I know it's really not that much code, I don't like the idea that...
Or you can just extract that logic out as a method.
You could do that. If it was something that you could append to the class, that might work out better. But
so this is better known as the dry principle.
Yes.
Which we talked about... no, have we talked about this?
Yeah,
no,
we have.
Sure, certainly, we've talked
we
about
did
this.
in Solid. It was one of the things in Solid.
Well, the D in Solid, though, I thought was the dependency...
Don't repeat yourself, right? Was it not?
Dependency
It's not.
injection principle. Was it
Yep.
not?
Inversion.
We've talked
dependency
about this.
inversion principle.
We've talked about it. I don't know when, though. Anyways, go ahead.
But yeah, so better known as dry, which is do not repeat yourself.
Yep. And they say duplication leads to multiple places to change and more places where bugs can occur. We've all had this problem where we know that this code exists in 5 different places, right? And if you don't know, the next person that comes behind you doesn't know that when they update this one that they need to update the other 4,
Oh, right.
then you've got a problem, right?
Right.
And that's that happens, and that happens so much. So if you can break all those out into a common piece of functionality that everything can use, right?
Right. Yeah, this is better known as dry. Do not repeat yourself.
Again, just do it.
I was waiting on one of you to catch it because I said it like a few times.
I like it. Drya.
What else do we have?
Don't necessarily stick to the single entry, single exit rule. This is structured programming. They referred to Donald Knuth, who used to kind of say that it would basically like, do ifs or do whatever. And the idea was always to have like return, be the last thing and only one return.
Yeah.
And I don't do that. I like to buck out early. So when you're reading the method, as soon as you stop caring about what happens next, like return out of there.
Yeah. I mean, so I try to have the one return as often as I can. But I'm also trying to keep those methods small so I can do that. But there are times where I will return early, but the way I'll try to do that is like where I feel like I still kind of structure that okay is like maybe if I'm returning back like some kind of result of, let's say it was a Boolean result and, I might even name that variable as result. And so I'll initialize it as, var result equals false. And then if there's some condition that I need to check out early, then it's just, return result right there and there, right? Whereas at the very bottom, then I'll have another return result. But I really prefer to not do that, though. Because I really do like the idea of if you have the one, then I think it reads cleaner. Because then from a testing perspective, there's one control path that's going to get you to that end state, right?
But it's going to branch. There's going to be a level of nesting there.
Depends on how big your method is.
Well, there's going to have to be at least one. If you have that return early, then there's some sort of branch happening. So you've got to have at least one level of nesting in addition to your function.
Yeah.
In the case that it needs that, yes. Right, sure.
Yeah, if it doesn't need it, then there's only going to be one return anyway.
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, I try and stick to one, but I will return early if some condition's not met and that absolutely you can't carry on, then I'll definitely return out. Just like what you were saying, right?
I mean, there's also times too where, so as a stylistic principle, right? There are times where you could take the approach of, I could go ahead and bail out early with a return statement, and now I have two possible return statements, or I could only have the one return statement, and maybe based off of that conditional result, if you were to flip that state, so instead of returning early because the condition didn't meet your satisfaction, if instead you flipped it to where if it does meet your satisfaction, then you do your work, right? Then
it'll skip that
you
block.
You could have the one return statement. And again, if we're talking about small blocks of code here, like if statement is only like 5 lines of code, then you're not going to mind an if statement that's in, on a level of indentation that's, only for 5 lines of code,
I
right?
think that's a fair point.
That's not going to be so bad.
Yeah.
So there have been times where I've done that. And here's the thing too. And the reason why that particular type of example comes to mind is we've talked about ReSharper in the past, right? And there have been times where ReSharper its default rules are pretty good about, hey, you could flip this state and reduce your indentation levels, right? But there will be times where I agree with you. I could certainly do that. But I kind of like the way it reads better right now. And since it's only a few lines, I don't feel like it's too bad.
I'll take readability over shortness of code any day.
Well, I mean, I'm still talking about short code.
But sometimes their whole inversion thing is to save you a line or 2 lines, right? If I remember right. It's been a while since I've used ReSharper, but...
Oh, that's blasphemy.
Yeah, I mean, I've still been debating buying it, but,
Yeah. All right.
So, how do you make these functions this beautiful? How's that happen?
I have a good story. Maybe it's not that good, but I was chatting with someone about a Code Wars problem, and I sent them my function. I was like, man, I had a really tough time with this. And they're like, oh, man, I'm ashamed because your function looks so nice, something like that. was like, man, you should have seen it 10 minutes ago, or not even 10 minutes, like 2 hours ago. Like that's how long I've been done, and I've been whittling this thing down because
Right.
it was a beast of a problem, and I knew that there was also the duplication and nasty stuff, and so it was just a matter of choosing to spend that time with it because anyone could have looked at it and known that there was duplication and inefficiencies. So it's just a matter of how much time you want to waste on it.
All functions start as trees until you whittle them down to toothpicks.
That is
Yeah, I
so
like
true. That is so true. Yep. I mean, there was when we were back talking about FizzBuzz, I think in our algorithms in the interview episode, we had mentioned one of the FizzBuzz blog posts where somebody took regular FizzBuzz and just OO'd it to the nth degree. And I mean, the thing is, the key takeaway is you never start out in the perfect end state, right? You start out in the state where you get something done, and then you start extracting those out and extracting them out until you get to a point to where you are into a more, whether it's OO or more readable or functional type state. It's just like you said, you whittle it. You cannot start thinking about the absolute perfect way to go because you'll just think yourself in circles.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well,
so we're ready to do chapter 4?
Chapter 4. I think
No.
chapter 4 is a lot shorter than chapter 3 as far as commentary.
yeah, we're already almost 2 hours into this, though.
Yeah.
I'm calling it.
Yeah, I think we're good for this
So,
evening.
in the resources we like, hey, guess what? We're going to have a link to clean code because we like it, despite some of the things you might have heard us say.
Actually, this is probably the book I agree with the most. I'm a big complainer. I'm an Eeyore, not a Tigger. I usually complain about everything, but clean code, just about everything we talked about, I totally agree with.
Man, this guy, he lies. This guy doesn't complain about anything.
The JavaScript. Let's talk about JavaScript or SQL.
Okay.
Or
he does
I don't know.
complain about SQL. He jokes about JavaScript hate, but he really does hate SQL.
Yeah. Well, that's not without good reason.
Why can't I sort dynamically?
So let's get into Alan's favorite section of the show.
Yes, sir.
It's the tip of the week.
Yeah, come on.
All right. So for my tip of the week here, I think we may have talked about conditional breakpoints once before, which are awesome. So if you're not familiar with this, is a tip specific to Visual Studio, and there, other IDEs may have similar features. But if you were to right click on a piece of code, set a breakpoint just by clicking in the left area, or also I think F9 will set the breakpoint too. Is that right? I think, or is it all
Yeah,
F9?
F9. That's correct.
F9. Oh, it's disable it is Control F9. Yeah, sorry. So you could go onto a line of code and either click on it on the far left gutter, I guess you could call it, or F9 that line of code and set a breakpoint. But you could also set a conditional on it, so you could say like, "Hey, only stop at this condition if something has happened." Right? So you could do that by right-clicking on the breakpoint and go into conditions, or do Alt plus F9 and then the letter C to get to the conditions. But here's a really awesome scenario, though, that I'm going to ask you two guys. Have you ever found yourself where you will write code that might log some message based off of some scenario, that just so you can like debug a problem better,
Totally.
right? Or maybe you're debugging something and you're like, oh man, I already wrote some code up here that would log this message based off of this scenario so that I could see what was happening there. I wish I'd done something similar over here. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you will do that no more, my friend, because you have actions with your breakpoints as well. So what you can do, go to your breakpoint again. You can set a conditional for it. You don't have to. But you can right-click on it, and unfortunately there is no keyboard shortcut for this. So you have to right-click on your breakpoint and click on Actions, and then you can set what you want to have happen. So if you want some code to be logged out to the console, right? So you could do something like a system.trace or system.diagnostics.writeline, whatever you want to do, wherever you want to write it. You could put that code in there to output some message, right? So maybe you want to see the value of something. Maybe you want to see the thread name that the thread ID that you're in, or maybe you want to see the call stack. So you have some method and you're like, hey, who just called this guy, right? Where did this come from? So there's a handful of defined variables. So $address, $caller, call stack, $function, $PID for process ID, $PName, TID for thread ID, or $TName. So you could set, instead of, let's say, for example, let's think of an Apache log4net kind of scenario, or log4j. If you're familiar with those standard kind of logging formats, right? But so you wrote some code, as you said that you have, to log a message based off of some scenario, but now you're actually in the debugger and you don't want to stop the session because maybe it took you a while to get to the point that you're trying to debug, right? So you could right-click on your breakpoint, select an action, go to the little dialog, which is log a message to the output window, and then write your similar log4net type of style in there so that you can see what's happening.
That's sweet.
And it's awesome. And then not only that, but you could also label your breakpoints so that you can actually, instead of just seeing breakpoint 1, breakpoint 2, you could see something more meaningful about what that breakpoint is meant to be.
So this is almost like a way for you to be able to inject code
exactly
at your breakpoint.
Exactly.
I'm not worried about checking it in.
And exactly.
Or having to stop and restart your debugging.
It's debug code that you can inject at will, at runtime, that doesn't have to be committed.
And you don't have to compile it.
Right.
That's beautiful.
Now, if you write something that it doesn't like, then you will get a little message about what it couldn't do, and then it'll just skip it. So it won't break the app. But yeah, it is a beautiful ability to be able to inject your debug code that you don't want to clutter your real production code with all this debug stuff, but yet there are times where you may need to see like some internals of what is happening. Who just called this method, and is it on the same thread that I'm expecting it to be on, or did something else happen? It's lovely. Amazing. It's beautiful when you see it in action. Now here's the one I will one word of warning, one caution, okay, is that you could write some beautiful code in that dialogue, but God help you if you accidentally hit F9 again.
It's gone.
Or if you click on that, you mean to right click on that red ball and instead you left click on it, because Visual Studio giveth and Visual Studio taketh away.
Save those office snippets.
Yeah, so... But yeah, it is totally a beautiful thing. I was working in some multi-threaded. We were talking about caching a few episodes ago, and I was working in some multi-threaded caching code and trying to debug some scenarios. And the ability to do this was just such a lifesaver because I didn't have to muddy the code up. Right. And here's the beautiful thing too, because if you ever found yourself in a scenario where you write, okay, so when I prefaced this whole thing and I asked you like, hey, have you ever found a situation where you like write code to actually log some message based off of a scenario, right? And then inevitably what happens is over the course of trying to debug this thing, you end up putting too much of it in, right?
Yeah.
And so now the real meaning is getting lost in the weeds, in the noise, because you're throwing so much of it out there. But because these are just breakpoints, you can selectively turn them on and off without losing your code as long as you disable the breakpoint.
Don't turn it off. Disable it. Or don't remove it.
Don't remove it. Just disable the breakpoint. So, you could say like, okay, I think this particular breakpoint message that I have here is a little too noisy. Let me just disable it right now and then move on, right? And especially if you combine those breakpoints with conditional statements, now you can really get powerful because you could say like, hey, only stop at this breakpoint if this condition is met. And then if that condition is met, take this action. And oh, by the way, I forgot to even mention that as part of the action, which you can say, one of the other options for that is there's a checkbox, continue execution. So you don't even have to have the breakpoint stop at that
It'll
spot.
just dump out your output.
It'll just write out the message to the output window and keep on going.
Nice.
Unless you want it to stop. But, I believe the continue execution checkbox is checked by default, if I remember correctly.
That's sweet.
So, yeah, it can be a lifesaver. And I'll have a link in the show notes for an example of that from some MSDN documentation that is geared towards Visual Studio 2015, but at least in 2013, this was there, and I don't remember about 2012. So your mileage may vary on Visual Studio 2012 and before, but 2013 and later, you're good to go.
Pretty cool. So mine is on Outlaw's favorite topic, which is Git. And I had a situation recently, which I'll briefly explain. Basically, we had a bunch of third-party code checked into Git, and we were upgrading the version of that third-party code, and so all those files changed, right? Like it was just...
Let's say if, for example, if it was a log4net, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Like it was somebody else's
Yes.
DLL. Well, I guess it's a horrible
It's not a
example,
DLL.
though,
It's the
because then
actual
we're-
source code. If you downloaded the source
Okay.
code from Git and you put it in your Git repo because you might be making changes to it or something, who knows, right? But for some reason, it ends up in your
What
repo,
code were we doing?
your local repo. And so you're upgrading the version of it. So now all these files change because they've made changes to the underlying system to make it more efficient, whatever the case may be. And you made a few changes to some of your files, and you go to do a Git status, and you just see a ton of red pop up because they've either changed or renamed or whatever the case may be, right? And you made some changes to the files, and you did a Git add, and you added them to the cache. Now you can't figure out for the life of you what files are in your cache that you're trying to commit. You would think that there'd be a way to do this using Git status, because Git status will usually show you what you've got cached for staging and what is modified on the disk. There is no way to do that with Git status to leave out the what do they call those things? Untracked files. What you can do, though, is this little trick where you can use git diff. So you can use git diff -- name - only -- cached, and that will return you a list of the files that you have in your cached or your staged area and just the file names. So if you need to figure out which files you actually touched and you've got staged ready to commit, that will give you a list of those files. It saved my bacon. So hopefully somebody else will find that useful. I spent so much time trying to figure out how to do it with Git status, it didn't work. So git diff -- name - only -- cached. Sweet.
Very nice.
And please don't forget, dear listeners, if you know what is coming after Git, please email me because I'm ready to move on.
What? You don't like Git? I'm fine. I won't say I'm finally. I actually enjoy it. It makes me feel like coding is less painful. There are some situations that is not true, but for the most part, I find it way less painful than anything I've ever used in the past.
I feel like Joe is.
That's the thing about Git. It sucks less than everything else, but you probably got to that point by putting in a good 4 hours a week of messing with it for years.
Possibly.
I feel like Joe misses subversion, and that's why.
No, not at all.
Hey, but hold on, Joe. I feel like you need to qualify that because didn't you get good at C# by being frustrated by it for 4 hours a week for the past several years too?
What about JavaScript, Joe?
What part of programming wasn't that way?
I Google basic stuff about Git daily.
Come on.
Daily.
I think you're exaggerating.
No, It's just stupid stuff like how do I amend a message or something. I just things I just don't do often enough, and I'm always messing with Git. And so I just feel like Git is really complicated, and there's a lot of problems. And every place I've ever worked has just spent so many hours just even arguing about the Git workflow. And so I think that there's got to be something else on the horizon, right? Please.
Got is coming soon.
Yeah, God. I type that all the time.
Well, if Git were to follow the path of Linux, since they were both started from the same mind, right? Then I guess we should expect to see different distributions of Git coming to a compiler near you. So,
man.
there'll be a Red Hat version, a Debian version.
Is it too late for me to catch Hurricane Matthew? Take me away, buddy.
Joe's on his way out the door. Not running away from the storm.
He's going to point break this thing and run to it with a surfboard in his hand.
Oh, by the way, so that's another thing. Like Joe, we almost he tried to force us to record again without him because last week when we were going to record, he invited Hurricane Matthew into his backyard.
Yeah, what's up with that, man? Nobody does that.
Yeah, knocked my fences down.
Man, unreal.
They're still down.
We're glad that was all that happened.
Yep. Legitimate excuses, though.
Yes. Yes.
So on for my tip. Actually, I changed my tip out as we were going along because I remembered an excellent MS Dev Show episode that I heard recently with Katrina Owen, and it was all about refactoring. And one of my favorite parts about that talk, and I always love talks about refactoring, was she mentioned some really good reasons for not refactoring some code.
What?
So I'll give that teaser. I'm not going to tell you what they are. You have to go listen.
Oh my god!
But I hadn't even thought of this before. When they started talking about it, I was like, oh, those are really good reasons. But they also talk about some different things like balancing refactoring with working and not trying to convince your boss that you need to spend the next 6 months refactoring something. And just really good, intelligent conversation, as always, from those people. So go listen.
Yes, do.
Interesting. All right. You've sparked my curiosity here. All right. So, this is, we've made it to chapter 3 of Clean Code. So we're really going at a fast pace here.
I feel like you could have read the book faster.
Just saying. Be sure to leave a comment on www.codingblocks.net/episode 48 for your chance to win a copy of Clean Code. And as always, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes to learn more in case if a friend happened to loan you their device so that you could listen to this, or if they pointed you to the site. And be sure to leave us a review. Go to www.codingblocks.net/review. As Alan mentioned, we greatly appreciate that. It always puts a smile on our face and really makes us happy when we read some of those reviews. So, I can't say it enough.
Totally. I think Joe's asleep. I feel like he should do the next thing. So
visit us.
Yes.
At Coding Blocks.
And drunk. So, visit us at codingblocks.net where you'll find all our show notes, our examples, our discussions, and more. And that's it for me.
And send your feedback, question, and rants to our Slack channel, codingblocks.slack.com, because you'll get much more better responses.
More better.
But you can also email us at comments@codingblocks.com if you have any questions or anything. Which is
.net.
.net. Oh,
wow.
.net.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're fired.
I am tired.
You're fired.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter at codingblocks, or head over to codingblocks.net, and you'll find all our social links at the top of the page.
Wow, I feel like that's his way of saying, hey, I need a sticker.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, he could read it off the sticker.
Good thing we put that .net on the sticker.
Man, I'm actually putting a sticker on my computer against all the willpower I have.
I feel like you're going to come to the dark side here because they are a beautiful thing. Look at how pretty my laptop looks with all of these stickers on there.
Your laptop makes my
your
bells
laptop
go off.
looks like you just bought it. Like,
it's amazing, right?
It's like
2011. It looks
I can't
brand new.
stand it. I look at your laptop and I'm like, when are you going to use that thing yet? Like, how long has that thing been sitting in a box?
Man, you
That's
guys.
boring.
How many stickers
Mine's
you got
got-
on yours, Joe?
Oh, 0, but I've got a lot of cat hair, dog slobber, and I don't know, taco shell crunchies on it. Yeah, I put this thing to
weird.
work.
Oh, dude, that's amazing. But your guitar,
Is held together by stickers.
it is. Like, I don't
Yep.
even know that it would work without them now.
Yeah, it wouldn't. It's covering some holes.
That's
Every
awesome.
every time you put a sticker on it, you change the tuning of it a little bit.
Yep.
Hey, suddenly it got deeper.
Like put another one on the left end.
That's awesome. All right, guys, that's a wrap.